Thank you for having me. Okay, I always find this amazing because I was at Ogilvy for 17 years. I've always been in corporate world, so I've never been out on my own. And last August, I find myself out on my own, and that's my logo. I didn't even have an account to invoice people, literally it is starting again from scratch. So I guess this is my story of past and what happened and problems I encountered, and then moving forward, how do I embrace that change? Who am I? Dave Trott always used to call me an irresistible force against immovable objects, because once it's in my head as to what I'm going to be doing, it's not going to stop until it's done, which is quite a scary thought for most people, because when you can't stop someone who's fearless and a maverick, there are some people that embrace it and there are others that are shit scared of it. So obviously what happens is over the years is that you get used to spotting the ones who like to embrace it. And then the others, it's not that they're doing, that they're bad or anything negative, they just do a different job. Took me a little while, I had Tourette's for a little while actually, because I couldn't stop saying the word fuckwits. But once I realised actually they're just two different ways of doing things. And my way is best suited to anything that is new and innovative and disruptive. So when I first got to Ogilvy, I'm steeped in advertising history, so traditional, above the line, full service agency with media departments. I was at Gold Greenwich Trott in the late 80s with Dave Trott, Simons Palmer in the 90s, Ogilvy from 2000. So there is not much that I don't know about the running of an agency or a business and how it works. So when I first got there, the chairman gave me the brief at the time to bring them into the 21st century. So I didn't go in as a planner or as a creative, or I went in as a fixer. He didn't even know what it was that he wanted me to do. It was just really moving them from an analog world to a digital world. So digital transformation is, I guess, what everyone calls it now. I was doing that 17 years ago. So I was running, a part of that digital transformation was running an edit facility and seeing that content was going to be enormous and streaming, etc. And I ripped out all the avids, put in all final cuts, started to do digital delivery, get rid of tapes, get rid of couriers. Even that in itself, all those years ago, working with companies like The Mill and Beam, which was their digital delivery, they hadn't even formed or started. They didn't even have a website up. But I was like, yeah, we'll try it, because I put together a business case of this is how much Mattel was spending doing tapes and couriers around the world. If they had 140 commercials a year that they were doing, each time they did a commercial, they would do 80 Digi and DATs masters, say $600 a pop, and they would push that out to all the different countries around the world for reversioning. So what I did was just stop all the tapes and couriers, and then had lots of phone calls saying, where's my tape? And I'm like, well, I haven't sent it. And then they would say, oh, you're going to make me miss my air date. But you have to go through pain to get out the other end. I always liken it to when you get a thing on your phone, if you're on or Android or iOS, where you have to do an upgrade, and you think, oh, do you know what, I can't be bothered with that right now because it's going to wipe my address book, or it's that same fear that everyone has, whatever. So it's just getting over that. It's going to happen. It's going to keep moving forward. You've got to start somewhere. So you might as well just kind of get into the thick of the pain. It normally only lasts about 12 weeks. And then no one remembers what it was like beforehand. They literally don't remember. So it's changing the brain into a new way of doing things. So that's what I did in the very early days. So it's putting in a workflow system, finance system, digital asset management system. The head of IT at Ogilvy at the time, because I was doing all the implementations with them, he used to call me the thick user. So he used to say to all his teams, has it gone through the thick user? And I took that as a compliment, because that would be me. I'm a UX person, I guess, in that old-fashioned way, because if I could use it and I was going to implement it and train people, then if I went that way, then everyone would go that way. Whereas I had the IT people or the techies standing behind me telling me that I was doing it wrong and I had to go that way. And I would say, no, you have to change it for people, because they didn't naturally understand, or they didn't have UX then, and you had to kind of learn specific keys. So I always kind of took it as a compliment that I was the thick user, and that everything had to go through me. So that was in the early days of digital transformation. And I think I really do take my hat off. Whatever happened in the last year with Ogilvy, I mean, that's changed. These things happen. But what was amazing was that they hired differently. So if you want transformation and if you want disruption, it comes at a cost of hiring a maverick. There are so many job specs that I've seen over the years that maybe, one of them was like 11 pages of what they wanted, which was basically me. I'm thinking, great. But then when they meet me, it's like, no, you're too maverick. Because what they say they want and what they want are two very different things. So it has to come in at top level that they really are happy with that level of, you're laying the road as you go along. You're not doing a PowerPoint presentation because you don't know how it's going to be. You have no idea. It takes an amazing level of trust from a CEO level to allow you to do that. So Ogilvy hired differently with me. I was not the usual. I was definitely a square peg in a round hole. And that, I'm doing a book that's coming out later this year, and the book is all going to be about entrepreneurship and people, I guess, like us that just feel like we don't fit in and we've got all these other ideas and why is no one listening, and it's so simple. But that's just part and parcel of the pain that we go through for wanting to affect change. So I think the first lesson that I encountered was if you really are serious about it, you've got to hire differently, and it's got to be a little bit scary. This is something that I did. I did these semesters of learning when I first started seeing the change and seeing that there was mobile out there and gaming and social and AR and VR, and thinking, well, how does anyone know who's good, bad, indifferent? I'm going to have to meet all these people. And then then it was all very random, and I was sending emails around saying, there's something called Facebook, you guys really need to pay attention. And what was happening was that I realized I couldn't just be random. So I devised this way to innovate called Semesters of Learning, and it's very focus driven. But what it is, it allows you to see 10 to 15 different companies every single week for 6 months on one topic only. So my first ever one was streaming. So I see 10 to 15 different streaming companies all around the world every single week for 6 months. And I go to the embassies, because the embassies like to get their country's companies into London. So I just say, I'm looking at streaming companies, and so they all then start to come to me, so I don't have to go everywhere. And then I'll go to random events. I'll go to streaming media events where I'll know no one and I'll know nothing. And the semester then gets pulled together where you see who is out there in the ecosystem, attach it to business. You then find a client that has a problem. So that was Ford at the time with the streaming semester. He was speaking to all his staff, and it was that big and pixelated and buffering. I'm going back about 10 years now at the first semester. And I'd seen an Australian startup who could deliver full HD quality stream to a desktop like that. So sold it into Ford, 2 extra revenue streams. 1, because we'd never done internal comms for Ford before, and 2, because we produced the content in-house. It wasn't a 30-second ad, it was a 90-second film of the Ford chairman speaking to all his staff that went to 22,000 desktops in 19 countries in 5 languages. But I would make the Ogilvy staff implement it. So the TV department at the time was like, well, no, we do TV. And I'm like, well, not anymore. So I would handhold with them a very scary time, because we'd never done it. No one knows if it can be done, but it always can be done if you've got the right partnerships. So that would get implemented, and then it would be put forward for awards. And it would mean then that Ogilvy can offer not just TV and print, but also gaming, streaming, mobile, AR, big data, whatever the semester was, you have a tangible case study. And I'll go through that later at the end if I've got time, the video, because just in case it takes us over, but where you'll see what the semester actually entails. The other thing is find a way, make a way. I liken it when I do things like the streaming, or every time we had something tangible to make, there would always be a point where someone would want to give up, or someone screaming or shouting. It's just never going to be easy. I think if you know that from the beginning, and just know that if you're a connector and you're a good person and you pay forward, you will always be able to get something done, but it's not going to be easy, because if it was easy, everyone would do it. Okay, so my biggest learning was to put a stake in the ground. So if you're innovating within a semester, I would always try and find Mother's Day, Father's Day, Wimbledon, a date where that is movable, so therefore you have to do it. Because stuff like this is surplus to requirements. It's not your normal day-to-day. So therefore you have to do something where you put a date in. So with IBM Wimbledon, we would always do something innovative. We'd put a brief in a year before, and we'd know that that date shape was immovable. So the first thing we did with them was, that was lab style, was an AR semester, augmented reality, and this was in June '09. This was before Blipper had even opened its doors, or even Leia. And we created within that semester, it was on Android, I think, at the first time when it first launched. And as you panned around at Wimbledon on your phone, you had an AR overlay that would say strawberries for sale over there, big queue at the ladies' loo over there. And it was just a way to innovate on one particular topic, and the measure of success was on PR. So it wasn't on how many people had Android phones, because they didn't. So you just look for different ways to measure success. But it's not easy, I think, is the huge lesson there. We did something with Fanta, which was also not easy, but this was many years ago now. This was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Maybe 10 years ago, I'd met a guy at a random event who was doing a soundscape, that every time someone connected lanyards together, a soundscape would go off in Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester. And I kept his name and number, and a couple of years later, some creatives said, we want to do something with mosquito sound, which is where kids normally get dispersed from street corners with this high-pitched sound that only they can hear and adults can't. So I said, I know this guy who does everything to do with sonic sound. So I got in touch with him, and he said, I don't want to work with agencies. They rip the piss out of you, is what he said. And I said, not this one. I'm going to work and handhold with you, and I'll make sure that you get paid on time, and it doesn't take 90 days to get you paid because it's a small company. And all these things you need to think about when you're working with people who are not your traditional people. And we did the most amazing, from an idea of creative saying we want to do something where we have kids communicate with this mosquito sound that only they can hear and adults can't. We had this mobile app where basically they could communicate with each other in a language that only they could hear and their teachers couldn't. So, and we stopped kind of counting at like the millionth download. So it's a way. So my black book, from seeing all those different people over the last kind of 10, 12 years, is enormous. And it just pays always to be decent and kind, offer people a cup of tea or coffee, don't keep them waiting like 45 minutes. That's how the old way used to be, where they'd say jump and you'd say how high. This is a new way of working, and it's collaboration. And don't expect that people will want to work with you. So that was something that we did with Fanta. And then I got an email from someone just 2 weeks ago saying, we want to do something with mosquito sound. Do you know what it is? Do you know anyone out there? I'm like, yeah, okay, fine, here you go. So these things come back always, whether it be a year later, 10 years later, they always have a habit of coming back. Be open-minded and open-hearted, which is what I just mentioned from that case study. It's like that with anyone doing anything new. You've got to build partnerships, relationships, see whites of someone's eyes. It's not a yellow pages, my black book. I've met literally every single person, and you get a reputation, and that is your values. It's that slide that that Roger put up. You have your own inner values, and that's how you get shit done, basically, is by being decent and kind and paying forward. Find the diamonds in the rough. So when I first started at Ogilvy, I really found that it was very white, middle class, Oxford educated. And this new way of working didn't suit that way of being educated, because it was one answer, and it's at the back of the book, and you're in an exam, there's no collaboration. And I just found that actually, and this was really from my son, my daughter was a straight A student, didn't hear from the school ever, they didn't even know what I looked like. My son starts there, and he's about to be expelled every week. And I'm thinking, what? And the difference is he's like me. So he would sit there and ask questions like why and who said and how come. And a teacher would be offended and say, sit down and shut up, and I don't want to hear from you in 8 hours. And he can't. So therefore, then I'm looking at Sir Ken Robinson's talk, Creativity and Education talk on TED, or Seth Godin's blog post about hunters and farmers. All these are interesting understandings of actually the hunters, the disruptors, are the ones that question everything, and actually they're the ones about to be expelled. So I worked very closely with the school at the time with Max, and turned the headmaster around and basically told him that he's fucking up my kid, and that's unacceptable, and helped him look at a different way of engaging with him. And we got in a translator teacher, so a teacher that understood Max and a teacher that also understood the teachers. So therefore, when Max could go to him and saying, oh, this teacher's just done that, and he could explain that teacher's point of view. It was the same within Ogilvy. I used to call it speaking Russian, that I would say something and people would look at me sometimes as if I was mad. and Gemma would say it, who was working closely with me, and they would get it. So I would just understand all of our strengths and weaknesses in emotional intelligence, and my weaknesses were her strengths, and then I played to it. So it was a flat structure, no hierarchy. It's just really understanding that emotional intelligence. So we set something up called the Rough Diamonds, which is a diamond shape, and it was going for 8 years until the lab closed. And it was working with the Ideas Foundation, who are a great organisation who work with Hackney, Tower Hamlets and Greenwich and all the schools in that area. And we would say to them, give us 5 kids 5 times a year. We want the ones who are going to be expelled to come in. And they would come into Ogilvy and think, oh my God, I didn't even know this existed. They think that they're going to work at a Tesco's checkout. And at age 14 is when you normally lose them. So they would come in, we'd give them this kind of, oh, you can work here, but stay with your education, go to either Ravensbourne or School Communication Arts. And then you'll have the chance that when you've done those courses, when you finished your second year, we'll speed date you. And we speed date about 70 or 80 of them across every single course, because creative industries have all merged, basically fashion and textiles and 3D printing and motion graphics. Everyone can pretty much do the same thing. And so we would speed date them, we'd handpick 5 or 6 to work with us for the year. So they'd work for 12 weeks in the summer, and we would pay them London living wage, so it would remove again that stigma of only the wealthy ones could come in to town with train fares and every day over the summer. And then the deal was when they went back in September for their final year, they would then have to teach the teachers, because I was fed up with the teachers saying what industry wanted, and they hadn't worked in industry in 30 years. So therefore, they would then come back to us at Christmas, come back to us at Easter, and then we would look to employ. And we'd employ random positions that we didn't even have a job spec. We would make it up. And now we find that there's job specs out for creative technologists. We did our first creative lab technologist with Will, who was terribly dyslexic, and I got into trouble because his emails would go out with spelling mistakes. And I just said to Will, we'll just put on the end of your email, sorry for the typos, I'm dyslexic. Fixed. Obviously, when you're doing things like that, you have to be very kind of dogmatic in, I'm not changing how I am intrinsically, you're not going to make me change. So find the Rough Diamonds, and then they would come into Ogilvy, and Will now is Head of Innovation at VCCP. So he was 8 years with us as a Rough Diamond. There's Rough Diamonds in at Ogilvy all over the place. They're incredible, those kids. Also making sure when you're doing stuff like I'm doing, I understand business. I'm not an idiot. I'm not disrupting for disruption's sake. So I understood that I was going to be in a position where I was running the lab with no money and no help. So Ogilvy just paid for mine and 3 other people's salaries across a group of 1,800 people, 10 group companies, and the other 3 were under 25. So what I made sure we did was that we earned our own money in an entrepreneurial way. So when I first set up the lab, Rory Sutherland, vice chairman, and I'd noticed him speak, not prolifically, and I said, Rory, do you want to speak, much more? And he said, yes. I said, well, if I act as your agent, if I get you speaker spots, if I can then negotiate what your money is, can that money come into the lab? And he went, yeah, sure. So in Rory's words, I pimped him out. And he was my first revenue stream. And then then serendipity takes hold, because when you're then speaking, then especially in North America, they say, are you published? And I would say, is Rory published? I say, no, he isn't, but he's written in Brand, Republic and Spectator. And I thought, well, maybe we can just publish a book without Rory writing it. Let's just amalgamate all these stories with one of the kids from Ravensbourne. And then we had this book called The Wiki Man, and I did it with a partnership with It's Nice That. And I was the publisher, not that I'd ever published a book before, but that's the mentality, the entrepreneurial mentality that you have when you're within, when you're an entrepreneur, or you're trying to make things happen when you've got no money, no time, no nothing. So we started to get this pot of money, which was just for R&D, so therefore we wouldn't need to ask permission. We wanted to put out on an event like this, we would just go ahead and do it. But I needed to understand other measures of success, so it wasn't just financial. So so the semesters of learning made sure that they hit, there was a bit of revenue coming in. Reputation, yes, because it made Ogilvy look good. Each time we had a semester, there was always something tangible that came out. Retention of existing staff, so people would stay because they were doing really interesting stuff. Recruitment of new diverse talent was the Rough Diamond. Relationships was the Black Book, that is massive. And responsibility is giving back. So always make sure there are other measures of success when you're going ahead. Always be honest and trust your instinct. This is really, I love this. I was in Dubai recently and they X'd out the word fuck because I forgot that was on stage and it was offensive. But it just is, this kept me going a lot of times to just kind of think, no, I'm a tiger. You know, I can do this and not be made to feel that I am a lunatic or talking rubbish, or just because I have a vision, it's very hard to explain to people what it is that you need to do. So to kind of just be honest, and I was at, I run the BBC Online Advisory board in getting in other digital companies to work with the BBC. Because they'd noticed that Ogilvy were working with these companies, why weren't they working with them with the BBC? So I went to the first meeting as chair, and I'd got in all these, you know, all these people from up and down the country from all these lovely independent digital companies. And the first meeting was a 2-hour meeting of McKinsey style, Q2RF of the BBC, and it was horrendous. So at the end of the meeting, I stood up and I just said, this is horrendous. I'm not coming to another meeting like this. It's bollocks, quite frankly. You don't know what you're asking me to help you as to why won't people work with you. This is the reason. I've been round to every one of these people around the table, and the reason they won't work with you is because they don't want to know about Q2RF. They want to be paid on time. Someone goes on maternity leave, the invoice is under the desk of things and it's not done. The procurement process in getting them to work with you is a nightmare. They might as well just throw themselves out the window there and then. You're talking about things that are not important to them. You need to turn it around. They don't care about you. So it was a very honest, open chat, and from then on, it was the whole meeting was like, and we did so many things just from that honesty. But it needs a strength of character to be able to say, no, this is wrong. I don't get what you're saying. Future's bright. I know we kind of talk about AI and the fact that everyone is going to be out of a job. And no, I mean, the example that I gave you with Rough Diamond, you make up the new jobs. The new jobs are there to be taken. It's the old ones that are boring, actually. In Darlan, who wants to do a PowerPoint presentation and go to meeting after meeting, those kind of things will die out naturally, but there will be new stuff because of technology that will be coming in. It's just not to be frightened of it. So, future's bright. I am a firm believer in terms of trends that there are so many amazing startups out there, but to move away from charities or NGOs or corporate social responsibility and start to actually look, if you're looking to be entrepreneurial or set something up, try and do something that is going to do good and make money. Okay, so the Global Goals, I think, is a great initiative, and I think when we're a few years down the line, we'll start to see some incredible companies coming through. Escape your comfort zone. It's never good to go anywhere where you know people. You can't learn anything. That, for me, was the biggest thing with the mobile industry and why it took so long to take off, because they were talking to each other all the time. If you start to kind of rip it up and get different, someone from fintech mixed with a scientist, mixed with an artist, interesting conversations happen. But when you first walk into a place like streaming media, you know no one and you know nothing. So I recently went on something last November called Summit at Sea, and it's where a group of 3,000 people are all put together on this boat, shipped out into international waters, and there's no Wi-Fi, there's no nothing. It's like Ted meets Davos meets Burning Man. It's mad. And I was in a jacuzzi. All these things, random things happen. Random things happen for a reason. So I was in the jacuzzi talking to this guy, and I've just kind of recently left Ogilvy, and what is it you do? And he's a publisher in Vegas, and he said, you know, there's a book in you. I'm like, really? So now kind of like fast forward just since November with having calls with him every 2 hours once a week, it then being recorded, it then moving into a synthesis, it now moving into chapters, and all of a sudden now I've written a book. I'm like, how did that happen? You've got to be kind of fluid to just saying yes sometimes, and you don't know how painful it's going to be, but you've just got to keep moving forward and escape your comfort zone. If it feels bad, it's good. Think like a startup. So as I mentioned, what happened with Rory and how the labs was initially, there are other ways in which you can go about doing things. You just have to think differently. You know, when push comes to shove and you can't pay your rent or you can't eat, everyone has it in them to be a hustler. It's not a bad word. It's just about thinking differently to raise money or do something in another way. But when you're up against it is when the interesting things happen. And you can say that in retrospect. It's like the Steve Jobs Stanford University talk. When you're looking back, you can start to say that. You know, a few things have happened with me within the last 4 years. Actually, it's been the most difficult 4 years, but the best 4 years with these things happening. So just to think in an entrepreneurial way and just let your intuition guide you. Because a lot of the time, we as humans have stopped trusting intuition and just go with being told what's right and wrong. But your tummy always knows. If you learn to trust it, then you'll move forward quicker. Paying forward, this is my last, I think I've got time to show this video. It's really important, like with the rough diamond stuff, or there was something called Ideas Foundation, to just give back just because you can, and you're not going to get anything back from it, maybe never, but it will always come back in some way, shape or form. So there was a kid called Ross Bailey, and he was part of the Rough Diamond programme. He was at school Communication Arts. So I knew Ross when he was 17, when he first went to SCA. And Labs were the first people, the hero sponsors for SCA. So we were the only company, I think, along with BBH, that gave Mark, who was running the school, 10 grand for scholarships and just from our lab pot, because it was the right thing to do. And one of the kids there was Ross. He had this weird idea to do pop-up shops for like an Airbnb, but for retail. So therefore, you know, you had an empty shop, you wanted to use it for something. So he had this idea, we helped him, we mentored him. We're not going to get anything back. In fact, we're giving them money. And we just were with him and talking with him throughout the whole time that he was there. And I acted as his mentor. And then he needed money to actually make it happen, because talk is cheap. You need to actually do something. And this is his story. There's a video there. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Steph. Oh, there it is.
Was there for a year, came up with a few different ideas, and the summer of 2012, once I had left this place, you know, Queen's Diamond Jubilee, national moment, I decided I want to take a shop and I wanted to make an idea happen. So we called Nicole up, and I sort of said, look, Nicole, I've got this idea. You're a mentor at this school. Fancy lending me a little bit of cash? And she gave us a couple of £1,000. And in 10 days, we found this store, rented it out, convinced the landlord and haggled our way in, and designed our own t-shirt range. And the idea was rock and roll, Queen with a rebellious twist. So this is the shop 10 days after we had the idea. I'm going to skip this video because we don't have too much time. And this is what people sort of said about it. Queen tat I actually might buy. Anyway, 2 days in, I get a call from Buckingham Palace. It wasn't the Queen saying that she was going to order some t-shirts. It was the Queen's t-shirt police saying that actually you can't sell these t-shirts. So I did what anyone in this room would do, with the risk of being sent to the tower, and hid all these t-shirts in the basement of the shop and continued to sell them. And what we did is when people walked in, we asked them for their business cards, because obviously the Queen's t-shirt police are going to have business cards. So people would come in, show the business card, we'd go, okay, that's fine. We'd smuggle downstairs and sell these t-shirts like Prohibition. Anyway, I digress. What we found doing this store is as many people that were coming to get these prohibited teas and smuggle them out also wanted to get their hands on the shop. So after launching that store, I went and I helped some friends launch some stores of themselves, and Appear Here was born. Today we match entrepreneurs like me and my mate to international brands like Apple and Marc Jacobs, and we help them find spaces from high street stores, locations like the Box Park, to luxury destinations like the Burlington Arcade. And they book them all on a beautiful online marketplace where they can find space, pay, transact, do the entire process.
So that are the kind of endings that happen, and that's me. Thank you very much.